Welcome to today's Executive Roundtable, how manufacturing leaders can transform digital content. I'm Brian Piper, Director of Content Strategy and Assessment at the University of Rochester. And fun fact, I actually started my career in technical documentation. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. Manufacturers face unique content challenges. They have product updates, which never stop. Documentation is spread across global systems, and the pressure to deliver accurate, safe, and self-service friendly content is greater than ever. Today, we're lucky to be joined by leaders from across the world in this space. Chris Groh from Crestron Electronics is the Senior Director of Global Training and Technical Documentation. Shikra Kichimbare is the Senior Manager of Information Governance from Cummins. And Stefan Gens is the Principal Worldwide Evangelist in Technical Communications at Adobe. All these gentlemen have tackled these challenges head on, and they are here to share exactly how they did it. And don't forget, we will take questions throughout the session, so drop yours in the Q&A box and engage with us in the chat. So let's go ahead and get started. On the agenda for today's session, first we're going to discuss how to scale documentation for product variants and global markets. Then we're going to look at turning aftermarket content into a competitive advantage. And finally, we'll address how to keep compliance and safety content accurate and up to date. So we're going to start off with a quick poll of the audience before we dive in. The poll is about the biggest challenge that you have with your technical product documentation today. You can go ahead and vote within the poll, submit your answers, and then those will show up. So let's kick things off with the challenge of scale. Product variants, regional regulations, multiple languages, it's a lot to keep up with. Chris, Crestron works across complex hardware and software product lines. How are you keeping documentation accurate and manageable at scale?
Brian, thank you, and happy to be here today. So this is an interesting question for me. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. I've worked as a technical writer and managed technical writing teams across various industries. And one of the things, that I was hit with when I joined Crestron about 7 years ago was the prior companies. I had maybe 100 products, 100 features, maybe a few hundred max. When I joined Crestron, I found that, I was now leading a team and managing 4,000 actively sold products with however many features and everything, right? So again, I think it breaks down into, how do you maintain and sustain documentation at that level? I've worked in all types of, various software platforms over the years, always looking for some other platform to be more efficient. One promising to, direct importation from the first, relearning software products. And the biggest thing that we did is leaned into single sourcing. You have to single source the content. When we have 4,000 actively sold products, we have a lot of variants of those products. You got a black one, a white one, a cream colored one, right? You've got the one for international shipments, the US. So in most cases, you have 90% of the content, 80% of the content is the same. And then what you do is if you can find a solution that allows you to single source that majority of content, right, using variables and things like that, if you really get into it, gives you the opportunity to really be able to adjust, update, make changes at scale. So I think that's pretty much it.
Excellent. And Shikra, at Cummins, what strategies have helped you maintain that consistency while reducing duplication across content systems?
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and great question again. Agree with everything that Chris mentioned there, but also I want to put some context in terms of what Cummins is, right? It's a 105-year-old company. That's a long time for a company to be alive, and I'm just thankful, and you can see it in how we have structured, right? It's spread across 180 countries. Our products are used on highways and farmlands across waterways, oceans, And of course, as critical installations in the last 10 years as power source backup, right? So mission is to power more process world. And as such, information in the form of content and documents in 100-year-old company with a ton of information, legacy, historical, has played a significant role in our success. So we have a sprawl that's probably unimaginable, but let me try to get that, in a succinct way. We use content templates, right? A lot of our engineering teams, all the way from building the products to working with our customers and finally servicing them, use a ton of content and documentation. And so we do have a global set of guidelines that provide those content standards, and we have centralized them, right? So centralizing is important, but it is not the only answer. But we need to centralize to make it feel consistent. We do have multiple architectures, right? I mean, we have a modular content framework. We don't want to recreate content to help reduce the deduplication or to help deduplicating it. And so reusable componentry of content is very important. So we've got, and how does that, how do we help that? We have a single source of truth for our digital assets, or media asset management or digital asset management is all single sourced, and that drives the content needs. Localization is inevitable, but a key area for localization that we've seen over the years is language. And so automating translations and having that service internally managed, it keeps the need to duplicate at a minimum, and just that portion, right? Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention metadata, right? It's a key component of understanding what content stored where, especially in the unstructured space where it's so anyone can name anything as whatever they want, right? So everyone's a content creator, but we do have a defined metadata structure, ontology, and then have a defined lifecycle management from a retention perspective, so that we have the most accurate and relevant content. Of course, we have versioning, but yeah, but again, it's not one simple answer, and also everything that Chris said, didn't want to rehash that. One thing I will mention is promoting the content to teams is important, right? We've got templates, we've got processes, we've got all this stuff, but the people who create the content, they need to know what to do and where to go and where to access, so that they reduce that deduplication as well. It's a simple way, but it's tough to execute.
Absolutely. And there's so many, different variations of the content that,
Yeah.
and different types of content, especially with a company that old. I'm sure the migrating all of those different types of content into the one system is challenging.
It is. Again, it's a fit for market, fit for use methodology. So understand what the use case is. If it's selling, it's a digital asset management tool. If it's procedures, policies, it's a DMS kind of a system. If it's an engineering content, look at the localization and source of truth as an engineering application. And those all have different needs and requirements. Yeah.
So, Stefan, what role does CCMS or structured content play in enabling fast and scalable updates, especially for multinational manufacturers?
Yeah, I think when Chris and Shukra dropped all these keywords like metadata and variants and variables and so on, one thing becomes clear: you cannot do that all of that with a simple word editor. You need to have a professional system. You need to have a CCMS that supports these features or functionalities like managing metadata, ontology, terminology management is another one for to prepare for translation properly and have a consistent language, and so on. So you need to have a content management system that scales with the needs of your content and that supports all these additional, on top of the content functionalities. And the typical thing for that is a CCMS, and the CCMS compared to, Shukra mentioned a DMS, a document management system, which is more something like, let's say, SharePoint or so. A content management system goes a step further. It doesn't just manage documents, it manages smaller chunks of content, components, like a CCMS is a component content management system. And then that enables you to recompile documentation. And I don't remember if it was Chris or Shukra. They said that they have all these. I think it was Chris with all the multiple documentations that share a lot of content. And instead of duplicating the content in a CCMS, you can manage one single information unit as a single source of truth, and then reuse this component across multiple documentations. And that saves a lot of time, increases consistency, helps with localization and translation, and in the end, reduces content duplication, and that reduces effort. So, and with that also cost. So, the CCMS is a big driver there to bring costs down, make teams more productive, and have it more easy with the content as a content manager and content writer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also really makes it easier for people who are managing that content to be able to go and find it easily, and instead of having to search through all sorts of different systems or different, instances of the same content.
Yeah. And the larger your documentation set becomes, the more content you have to manage, the more easy it becomes with the CCMS. So if you have just 3 documentations because you just have 3 small products, then a document management system or DMS or Microsoft Word even might be enough. But if you have a lot of product variants, about a lot of configurations, maybe you're even producing custom built machines, and every documentation is unique, like a as built documentation, then there's no way around a CCMS, I would say.
Absolutely. So support content is often seen as an afterthought. But in reality, that's where the customer experience really happens. That ability to quickly self-serve makes a big impact. You talked a little bit about metadata and tagging and making sure that those systems are in place. Shukra, what are you doing at Cummins to ensure that support documentation is accessible, intuitive, and built for self-service?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Brian. I think part of this may sound rather intuitive, but I think the single greatest factor in my mind, again, is that for something to be accessible means it's easy to use, don't need to remember 20 passwords, 20 logins. In my mind, single sign-on, which may be a little bit not germane to this topic, it has been the biggest enabler of accessibility across all these different, content management, document management systems, and DAMs and MAMs. But in general terms, having your audience in mind, right? Keep your audience in mind. Who is it? So is it a service tech that's in the field? Is it a designer of content for our external website? Who is using this? And so doing some user-centric content management system design is key. We have that in spades. But also think about working conditions, right? Not everyone's sitting at a desk. In fact, we have a lot of our service capabilities are unique and in some ways do make us the best player in the market because we're able to service our products wherever we are, right? Wherever our customer is, whether it's in the water taxis of New York or it's at some high mountain levels in Colorado where a truck's broken down. And so having the right devices, having the right resources for our employees is also a critical factor in making these accessible and built for self-service. Obviously, visual aids, step-by-step instructions, being a manufacturing company, that's kind of in the DNA to ensure that anyone who takes up the job and is doing the work can understand. As I said, with localization, again, you're looking at multilingual support, but with the pace of innovation, I mean, we look at problems for our products and we want to service them right away, right? And with the rapid pace of innovation, what was accurate yesterday or last month in terms of servicing that product may not be today. So maintaining a version history, not just a single source of truth, but maintaining some version history is also important. Lastly, goes without saying that everything that I've said, if you don't have a feedback loop, so we've got a feedback loop in terms of support for support, right? So how can support do their work better, and so we've got a dedicated support team that supports the support team with their support documentation already built in. So variety of factors that go into ensuring that our support documentation is accessible, intuitive, and built for self-service.
Yeah, and having that feedback loop is so critical to understand how the boots on the ground people out in the field are actually experiencing that support documentation. And you mentioned the fact that, how critical it is to have the right equipment to be able to access that. And it's also critical that the documents are built in the right way to be delivered seamlessly to those equipment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Chris, how has improving documentation helped reduce pressure on Crestron's support teams or enabled better service experiences?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Good question. I think, how has it reduced pressure? Well, accessibility, right? I think at the end of the day, when we're providing content, it's our job is to make it easy for people to find what they need when they need it, right? That's it. Now, the technical documentation team, when I was just heading that team, we leaned very heavily and worked very closely with the engineering teams, the product teams, from specification phase, right, to completion. And we did that very often, product manuals, box documentation, right, compliance information, all of that to line everything up based on the initial specifications. Then we started working very closely with our technical support side of the organization. And what we found in most cases is that's really where the rubber hits the road, as they say. We can spec it out, we can design a product, we can, idealize on how it's going to end up working in the real world. But until that product gets out there, right, that's when you start to see some of the nuances. Oh, people are going to try to install it this way, they're going to put it into this solution, right? And there may be some challenges associated with that. So right out of the gate, we have to work closely with support. The other thing is, I think you need to establish your documentation teams, right? Even if it's just you are the center of the universe. Documentation and information is so vitally important. And there's so much information out there today that it's very difficult to discern what's real, what's not. I used to joke that when the internet was born, I said, when are they going to build the fiction and nonfiction sections? So I know. Now you've got AI tools running and they're providing all kinds of information. So it's a couple of things you have to contend with. What is the end user and the customer getting? What's the information they're getting? We've said for years that they're not reading the manual, right? We know that joke, right? They don't read the manual. So now you have AI chat tools that are actually going and getting the information for the people who are not reading the manual. So you've got to lean into that, make sure that you're providing the right, accurate content, and look for ways that wherever you're hosting your content, you can influence those results. The other thing is work very, very closely with your support teams. When I took over technical documentation, we started doing the online specifications and product pages. We took that from marketing because we're working with engineering already fine. Now, we also own our support site. We've called it online help for a long time. We're getting ready to launch it as a more community site with discussion forums and such. So we're bringing our manual documentation into those search results. We're bringing in our tech support articles. Customers can access case information, and their search results are based on, cases. So I think all of that is so important to keep working toward, that self-service kind of culture. But then finally, the other thing I often try to do, because I am overly optimistic sometimes, is I tell our VP of tech support that someday I'm going to run him out of business because we're going to self-serve everyone and give them just what they need. And I think that should really, whether or not that's something we'll ever achieve, I think if you set your sights on that, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic goal. And it was an interesting point you brought up about the difference between the engineer's perspective and the support team's perspective. And I know when I was doing technical writing, we were often just going off of the product specs and the engineers. You really have to have that, feedback loop, like Shakur was talking about, with understanding what your, like you said, the boots on the ground, what they're experiencing and what their pain points are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing you mentioned was the AI tools and AI search being able to be used for this. I think that really calls out the importance of content governance and document governance to make sure that you're removing any outdated or inaccurate content that's out on your system. And I think so many different industries just leave that content out there, not realizing that these models are going to train on that information and then return those results. So,
absolutely, Brian. If I can, just to add to that, when we moved to HTML-based, web-based documentation, we started authoring in an XHTML authoring tool, to single source and all of that. So as we started publishing not only the PDFs but also HTML variants of this, what we started to realize is that those results were crawled immediately by things like Google search, and they started creating question and answers based on the actual content we wrote in our manuals, right? And now, and we would make a change, and I would watch that and say, how do we influence exactly what's there, right? We want it to go everywhere. So you leverage those tools, and they can really do a lot to benefit you in getting your message across accurately.
Absolutely, for sure. Stefan, what are some content strategies that leading manufacturers are using to turn documentation into a differentiator?
I would like to build on top of what Shukra said. Think about your audience. That's one thing. You're not just writing for a regulatory body, because there's some legal requirement for that technical documentation. This documentation will be read by someone, usually a human being, but can also be maybe an AI engine that you need to feed with that knowledge. Which brings us to structured content in the end. But I think one crucial part is, and I think the companies who are successful doing technical documentation in a successful manner are companies who have understood one thing, and that is understanding that the classic historic differentiation between pre-sale and post-sale content is not really helping anyone. You need to understand that technical documentation as a classic post-sale documentation is also a pre-sale documentation often. Because very often buyers go to the documentation to look up things. Let's say you're buying a land machine and you want to understand how that land machine operates, how easy or difficult it is to operate it, how difficult or easy it is to maintain it, and so on. Then you go to the technical documentation, and if you buy a product for $100,000, you will very likely read or at least look into the technical documentation. And if that is not giving you a good experience, it might be even out of scope for your buying decision. And even worse, if you spend the $100,000 and buy the product and then get a bad documentation. I didn't want to use the S word here. That was on my lips first. Then you might even feel buyer's remorse and are unhappy with it, and you throw it away and immediately call the support hotline, where we are at Chris's topic, reducing support efforts through proper documentation also, and reducing calls in the call center and so on. So companies who have understood that technical documentation is a crucial part and is also a big part in the buyer's journey and in the customer experience, those companies will have a successful strategy with their content and will also have happy customers in the end.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you brought up about the content supporting pre-sale as well as post-sale, because a lot of clients come in, or a lot of customers, potential customers, come in knowing what features they're looking for, and those specific factors will influence their decision criteria whether or not to make that purchase.
Right. And it's also, if you think of it, the customer journey doesn't end at the technical documentation. The technical documentation can also be an entry point again into a new customer journey for the same customer. Think of spare parts. Think of additional components that can enrich the product that the customer might be able to buy. And if you're talking about an online interactive documentation, like Chris mentioned, with HTML documentation, web-based, and so on, you have a lot of possibilities there. And with a proper platform, like, let me say it, Adobe Experience Manager, I'm an Adobe person, you can combine technical content and marketing content even. And let's assume the customer comes to the technical documentation website where they can read how to replace the battery. There should be a link to order a spare battery, and you can then bring them back into the sales funnel for additional components or upgrades or whatever. So if you really think of it, of technical documentation in a holistic way as a part of the whole content ecosystem of a company, then it can really add value to your company, despite the fact that it stores all the knowledge of your company and your products.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris was talking about, and Chakra both, talking about having that single source of content that you can update. If you could leverage that for sales as well as support, it makes everybody's job much easier to update those. So let's shift to something critical, safety and compliance. So when technical documentation is out of date, it's not just inefficient, it's a liability. Stefan, Adobe works with some of the biggest manufacturers in the world. How are they using digital content infrastructure to ensure that safety documents, SOPs, and training materials all stay compliant?
I mean, there are multiple aspects in that. Historically, of course, compliance or making sure that content is compliant with certain regulations is usually very human work. Yeah, so someone has to proofread the content, review the content. It goes to a subject matter expert first, then maybe to a legal reviewer, and so on. What I see currently is, and I was just having a bigger discussion a few weeks back with a bigger company, and they need to make sure that their documentation is also compliant with certain EU regulations. And they are feeding now the AI engine with all the content from the regulatory documents, like the EU regulations. And then the engine knows all the regulations and can automatically proofread the topic that the author is writing and double checking it against the regulation. Might not be 100% perfect always yet, I would say, but it's a big step forward and a big relief for the whole review process, and can make the whole review process much faster, because a lot of inconsistency or incompliances with the regulations will already be taken out during the authoring process, when the author automatically gets support from, like we have an AEM with an AEM guides with a side panel for the AI assistant, and it can proofread the content and check it maybe against a certain regulation that you have fed in. And then it helps the author to create content that is compliant already faster than it was ever possible in the past. So that's one big trend I see. The other things are, of course, you will still, and even the more complicated and legally complicated your product is, you will always have review processes, and human reviewer, subject matter expert involved, and having the whole review process much more automated and getting the whole content lifecycle managed in one system, with proper online reviews where multiple reviewers can review the same document at the same time, and the author can just get all the review comments back in a consolidated form instead of getting 20 PDFs back for implementing the review requests. Yeah, all that's and then being able to chat with the reviewers in real time, all these things. That is the second big thing, collaborative online review, which makes it much more productive, I think. So these are two thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And You mentioned that the even though the AI may not be 100%, even if you can save 60% of your time, 40% of your time, I mean, that adds up at scale. It's huge.
Yeah, definitely, Brian.
So, Chris, how do you maintain up-to-date training and SOP documentation across Crestron's global operations, and what made the biggest impact for you?
Well, it's interesting because I've led teams globally in different regions across the globe as well, as handled products and compliance requests and things for every product that's sold in every area of the country. And I think this is the part where the technical writer becomes the project manager, right? You have to, and I talk with tech writers all the time. There is a project management component to tech writing. You have to be organized. You have to understand. You have to know what the processes are, right? You got to kind of help it along. You're central to that. So, in updating and maintaining, we have to keep those relationships open with all areas of the business: engineering, compliance, legal, marketing, sales, right? Support. And we have to understand when there is, a potential issue. Obviously, we lead with our best foot forward. Right? We set up our specs before products are released. We'll submit for compliance. We'll build our own testing procedures for both our quality engineering and our quality control as a final piece of manufacturing. The technical documentation team gets involved in all of those areas, provides content for review, and we try our best, as humanly possible at this point, right, to move forward with the consistent message. It's challenging. And I'm always looking for ways to make that easier, right? To automate some of those processes. And I think there's some opportunities, down the road to do that and bring those things together. But particularly when you get into a larger company where you have so many different internal systems that don't communicate with each other, it makes it even that much more difficult, right? So I say again, we lead with our best foot forward. Our intentions are to get things current. But when they're not, you have to remember, make it easy for yourself to make those updates. When I joined Crestron 7 years ago, I was getting phone calls from people saying, hey, we have to stop shipment because there's a firmware notice we have to put in the box. Why are we putting firmware notices in the box? Don't we tell everyone to update their firmware as soon as they receive their products? Don't we, why? So we stopped doing that. Recently, it's kind of surfaced again. Someone said, oh my gosh, we have to put this notice in there. But instead now we have a compliance document with a QR code on it that takes them to the manual. So there's one piece of documentation that's pretty much standard for the life of that product. As we need to update it, we will. We have different vendors, OEMs, contract manufacturers, right, with access to that. And then we can control the content digitally based on the QR code. So that's how we can maintain that and ensure that we always have the latest and greatest out there. Now, with a PDF, you're kind of limited, but with HTML content, we can do that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your point about the technical writer becoming the project manager, especially if you're trying to reuse that content for, as Stefan was saying, for marketing, for sales, for your different teams. You've got to make sure that you're working with all those teams up front so that you put all the right content in there.
Yeah, 100%.
So, Shukra, what systems or practices have helped Cummins improve governance around critical documentation?
Yeah, great question. And everything that, Stefan said, I think I can't, or even what Chris mentioned from a product standpoint, I can't, I'm going to talk about the practices that have helped us get better governance, okay, around critical documentation. So we have had the legacy, as I said, of being around for more than a century. And as such, we have a very broad framework of systems to include all these different DMSs, DAMs, MAMs, intranets, structured applications for engineering, and so on and so forth. But the critical part about this journey for us has been not losing sight of who owns the content and information, right? And not leaving that to chance. There's so much movement, as I think Chris or Stefan mentioned, hey, someone becomes a different role, or establishing a clear ownership around that information, designating business and IT owners, especially with multiple IT systems, keeping it accurate and relevant, really has helped us ensure that governance around critical documentation has that set of focus, right? That clearly we can say who's the decision maker versus there's a lot of uncertainty around what that decision making is and who can drive that. Driving governance in our DNA, right? So we have policies and how we protect and manage our information. It's embedded in our code of conduct and in our ethics certification process that employees have to go through every year. And much recently, we published an AI ethical use of AI policy, to what Stefan was saying. And we've been educating our employees on how they should work with AI models, what to share, what not to share. And so very germane to that and very critical and fundamental to that is what type of content classification you have in place, right? That's another area where governance is as good as, you can govern as good as what you know about that area. And so we have put in a lot of effort, a lot of good effort around a good content classification framework. Metadata obviously helps with that, right? And I mentioned it before. It not only helps with search and access, but I think it also provides a critical functionality towards understanding content analytics. And so that helps us govern as well. Automation is key here, right? I think Stefan mentioned some of the automation, but not just the AI, but even simple things like our DMS having everything automated in terms of audits, approvals, yearly or bi-yearly, biannual notifications to ensure that the accuracy is vetted and validated, right, and verified. The authors are the right authors, right, because people might have moved. So automation is key. And in today's world, AI enablers are as critical. I mean, we're just at the starting point of AI, if I would. But Stefan detailed very adequately in terms of governing. We are looking, to prove out some of these, what I would call baseline, like, hey, content generation, draft generation capabilities, but also some advanced capabilities like contract intelligence, right? And I think Adobe supports that as well, or Adobe is the platform that is enabling that contract AI intelligence. So just looking forward to some of these advanced capabilities to govern regular communication, ensuring that our employees, our users are aware of their role and responsibilities with regards to governance is key. But also we have to ensure that with our historical team knowledge, right, the amount of knowledge that Cummins has, we want to make sure that we are also playing the card of knowledge management, not just content management, right? And ensuring that we're only keeping the knowledge that we need, both legally and business appropriate, and then everything else we are terming as redundant, obsolete, trivial. And again, that's more of a life cycle management from a governance standpoint, but it's important to ensure that we have the most accurate, but also the most relevant in terms of historical knowledge on products. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying a lot of things, but governance is not a one-shot. It takes a village. Yeah.
Right. And Shukra, I think you brought up an important point there, and briefly touched on it earlier as well. What many companies don't understand is that the whole technical content that is produced in the company is a storage box of all the knowledge about the products. Very often technical documentation centers are just cost centers. Yeah, we have to do it because of regulations. Yeah, but in fact, the technical documentation stores the whole knowledge about the product. And if you have a long history of products over decades, very often people leave, they retire, whatever, but the technical documentation still stores that knowledge. And even SOPs and or this kind of content. So if a company understands that this technical content or knowledge is also knowledge content, and this is why I usually switched over from talking about technical documentation to knowledge content over the last years and changed that phrasing a little bit. Because that knowledge content may be training content, may be SOPs, may be maintenance instructions, may be the classic user guide, whatever. All this is knowledge about the product. And if we think a little bit into the future, and we don't need to go very far there, if we feed all this knowledge into a custom AI engine, then this custom corporate AI engine knows everything about our products and feed in some additional databases like SKU databases, whatever. Then you really get a very powerful solution. And this will enable technical writing in the future, I think, to produce technical documentation much faster. And this will change the role of a technical writer, I think, to become more like a content governor and content manager instead of just just is maybe the wrong word here, but instead of just writing, they will be more like content reviewers maybe, and subject matter experts who manage the content and not so much spending so much time on writing and not even, of course, formatting, please, formatting content, but really thinking about the content itself. How can you rephrase the content for the audience? Create more exciting content. Of course, it depends on the product, but create more exciting content as well, and also have more capacities to think, what can we do with that content? And I like to bring this into the context, especially in manufacturing. Here in Germany, we talk a lot about Industry 4.0 or IoT, as the Americans they say. And if we think of big machine parks where all the machines are connected with each other and communicate among each other, and there's a lot of content that these machines can use, and that content is stored in the technical documentation. And there's one manufacturer here in Germany. They were also presenting at Adobe Data World 2-3 years ago, where they talked about that. The machine is pulling the maintenance information. When is my next maintenance cycle due? From the server, from AEM, from the technical documentation. Yeah, and that is completely crazy new stuff in a way, where you say, if we think that we are, as a technical writer, I'm creating content, maybe a table where I put in information when what the maintenance cycles are, and then the machine pulls that content or that information from my server, from the technical documentation, and as soon as I update it as a writer, because the engineer told me, no, we need to reduce the maintenance cycle from 3 months to 2 months. I just update it in my technical documentation, and next time the machine pulls that information, it gets updated, and no engineer needs to drive out and upload a new firmware to the machine, and gets automatically over the air.
Yeah, and it's
Rise of the machines, right?
great.
Yeah.
And it's a short jump from there. I mean, if you have this knowledge repository, technical documentation really becomes like the source of truth for, I mean, you connect that with your CRM, you connect that with your support data. Now you could use that for all your marketing, you know, to power all of your marketing, all of your sales calls. So it's a huge like lift. And it's the technology is so close to being able to do all of that. Pretty powerful.
Especially when you start connecting systems. Yeah, like if you connect the CCMS with your PIM system or PLM system or Jira or whatever, to automatically pull information and populate templates with the information, so that the tech writer doesn't need to copy and paste stuff anymore, but gets auto pre-populated release note or whatever. And then they can just review that content and rephrase it for the audience in a proper way, so that it sounds good and is in line with the corporate language, and so on and so on. Focus on these important things instead of copy and pasting data from one table into a document or so. This is where if you start connecting the systems, then it becomes really fun and fast.
Right. And you can even create that feedback loop where the information gets back to the customer results or reports come back to the engineers. So now they know how they should be able to adjust the products to better fit the end user's needs. It's great.
Right. Especially when you bring in analytics. Yeah, like Chris was talking about HTML-based documentation. And when you connect that with analytics and see, okay, a lot of people are visiting this topic, how to replace the battery or whatever, then, you know, maybe there's something wrong in the product, or maybe it's too difficult to use in this area of the product. And maybe we should pass that to the, and there are a lot of comments where people complain how difficult it is or so. And then you can pass on that feedback to the engineers and say, hey, here we are the technical documentation department, and we noticed that replacing the battery is too difficult for the users, and can so that you have a great customer experience there in the next product.
Absolutely, it's fantastic. This is actually a great time to launch our second poll. So, how confident are you that your safety compliance documentation is always up to date? So you can go in and answer that, and we'll see what the results of that are. So we've explored a lot in this conversation, everything from scaling technical content to ensuring safety, improving customer service. So let's open up to questions. If anyone has questions they want to put in there into the Q&A document, that would be great. We already have some excellent questions in there. Jay asks, how can the AI pull the correct info? If anybody wants to jump on that one.
I would say that's a little too broad to answer, because it would go very deep into how AI engines work and how they understand content and pull or recompile or compile new answers on that. I would skip that question because it would go too deep into AI models and LLMs, etc.
Yeah, but let me give you an example, right? So Jay, just an example of how can it pull. You need to have a clear set of business rules. What do you want to achieve, right? When you say correct info, what is correct info? Find out if you can, specifically measure that and say, okay, this, I need the invoice number, I need the detail on the service, I need the name of the product, right? So what is the correct info? And then you can also ask, okay, what am I going to search? Am I going to search the document in its entirety? Am I going to search just the header or footer, right? So I think AI is nothing but a set of rules that then get embedded into a model, as Stefan was saying, and then it does that over and over again and learns on its own, right? Just like a potential human would. But asking the right questions is going to help the AI pull the right info. Just want to close that out. Yeah. Sorry, Stefan, I didn't try to go too deep, but definitely asking the questions, because asking the right questions is a skill that we had unlearned over a period of time. And now we're going to start to have learn again so that we can ask the right questions to get the AI to pull the right info.
Prompt engineering.
Exactly.
And I think the best way to make sure that AI is pulling the correct information is to make sure that your information is correct, that you're updating your technical documentation, and that you don't have bad content out there. So Michael asks, technical and knowledge content teams are often deemed as cost centers. So getting a response is not easy compared to a CMS for content or for marketing content. Any advice on how to get leadership buy-in for a CCMS?
I'd love to take that one.
Jump on it, Chris.
So one of the things, in my career, different companies, different manufacturers, different products. I've been with financial software, pharmaceutical, large-scale equipment, and now, AV products and integration products and automation products. And I think the first thing you kind of have to look at is your team right now and your resource utilization. Take a hard look at that. I've learned some practices from purchasing teams. I've developed my own, what I call a rough cut capacity plan for my teams. And, we can look at how much time technical writers are spending with different projects, right? And then that's where you really start. And this is not, I don't want to confuse it with, in the days where every time the technical writer went, they had to start the clock and show their production time. We're talking, estimate. If you know you're working 40 hours a week, somehow keep track that 20% of my time was spent here, 20% was spent on this project. And if you can start establishing that data, you can easily start showing trends toward more efficiency, right? And I think that's the baseline, right? Because from leadership perspective, yes, you're a cost center. And, there's the sales organization, and their responsibility is to generate the sales. The rest of the organization is to support those efforts. So don't be afraid to admit that you're a cost center. It's okay. And believe me, I now head a training team. I don't know a technical documentation team that spends as much as them. So you're safe. We need equipment and product. You're just talking paper and documentation and software tools for greater efficiency. So long story short, lean into the efficiency aspects when communicating with leadership, right? Show them on paper what you have to gain, and how much more you can accomplish. In most cases, if you start doing this analysis, you'll see you may be underwater every couple of months, but you'll start to see a trend. For me personally, we have clear visibility on projects every 2.5 to 3 months. And then as those projects shift month over month, we may end up being underwater, but we can make shifts and adjust and reprioritize to make it work. I think those are the things. So if you're stressed and you're stretched thin now and you're looking for different ways to gain efficiency, put a strategic proposal together and I think you'll win.
Yeah, great advice.
Thanks.
So Akshay asks if we can talk a little bit more about what strategies you use to keep your content current.
I can take a stab at that. I mean, I thought about it a little bit, but essentially the biggest thing I'm seeing in this space to keep your content current is, using not only our business partners and the owners of the content or the users of content, but in essentially providing them tools and services that are easy, intuitive to provide feedback on the content. So it's not just, hey, and then that's one, so a feedback loop, but then also starting to look at, can AI do some of this, right? Can some automated process go and audit, when was this last reviewed? When was this last, approved? Is the content owner still, appropriate, or are they not even in the system? I mean, those are simple checks, but just trying to get that level of structure into the process is going to help with keeping your content accurate. It's going to help with, again, it's not going to significantly impact it, but it's going to be an initial effort that will help influence the quality of the content that you have. Absolutely.
If I could add to that too, I just wanted to say, first of all, get product in the hands of your writers. That's the first thing. Make sure they know what the product is. Now, some stuff is very large scale, but if they have access to it, or even remote, they need to be current and they need to understand the product itself, right? The other thing is, as Shukra has mentioned, right, the feedback loops, they're never ending. I'm fortunate now, I have technical documentation and training. And the training team used to write their own curriculum, but guess what they're using for curriculum now? Our technical documentation. And then we're refining it. And then I have technical writers who are actually helping with training now. So they're in face-to-face with our students, right? And then we have support. I think all of this kind of goes back to, how do you see yourself, as an individual and an organization within your organization, right? And being confident in communicating. Who doesn't want current, accurate content? Let them know that that's what you're there for, right? Encourage people to provide feedback, keep a thick skin, don't take it personally, and work together, right, to make it the best that we can to provide our customers.
Absolutely. Great point.
And I think when it comes to how to keep current, maybe one thing, Ryan, how to keep content current and up to date, it all comes down to the question, how fast can you publish your content and bring it to the market? It's the time to market that counts there. I was at the Adobe Summit, I was talking to someone. It's a different industry, software industry, but they were able to bring their release time down from, I think it was like 3 months to 1 week. So they can ship the current documentation much faster to the users than they were able to do that before with structured content, a content management system, or CCMS, then component content management system, with automatic publishing to PDF, to website, and so on. If you spend hours and hours and hours in copy and pasting content from one document into the other, if you spend hours into publishing, if you spend days and weeks into reviews and translation processes, which are not automated and so on, then you have a long time span until you can push out your content. And every small update, is it a full update that you need to do? Do you really need to publish the full documentation again? Or is it enough to just update that single piece of information, that single topic or so, and have incremental publishing where you can just publish one single topic and overwrite, so to say, the older one, or create a new version of that on the website? So these are questions that are worth looking at, how the whole process looks like and how it can be optimized for faster going to market.
Excellent. So I think we've got time for one more question. So saw this one jumped right out at me. How can we make product manuals more interactive and engaging?
Can I jump in first? Sorry. This is really something that I've been asking myself for a very long time. I found something I wrote probably in 2000. For what we were going to try to do, right? And my vision at that point was someday we'll have fully interactive user manuals. I think it starts with, and Stefan, you mentioned again, right, with the HTML content when we were talking, right? There's so much opportunity there. You can host multimedia content, right? There are other things you can do depending on where it lives and what security policies you have in place. But I think it starts there. You look at HTML content, dynamic content, and then you look at, working with maybe other teams, as a tech writer and having a technical writing team of writers. I've even struggled with having an illustrator on my team. Technical writers are not illustrators. They can use Adobe Illustrator. They can use Photoshop. They can do it. But getting a team of 7 to 14 to 25 people to be consistent, and not have to write a style guide to show line weights and everything and take everybody through, right? It's challenging. So we've tried several times to have a single source illustrator providing content, right? We've looked at, building tools within, existing things. So I think, overall, there's a lot of opportunity. Video content. We have used our HTML content is now embedding YouTube training videos. Which we're trying to keep to a minute. Those videos actually are based on the steps that we've written in the user manual. So now I take the content from the user manual, step 1 through 5. We give that to our training team to create a training video that emulates and duplicates that. So now you have your option. You can look at it. So I think it starts with HTML content, unless there's some other solution I'm not aware of. And then the possibilities really become endless as far as I see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as technology evolves, the augmented reality capabilities are, fairly limitless for on-demand technical support, but it all starts with good documentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's, Chris, if I may share one small example. I know we are almost on top of the hour,
sure.
But there's an elevator company, you probably all know them because you probably have stood in an elevator from them. And they have their service engineers who go into the field, stand on the top of the elevator in the machine room and so on, and need to repair something. And what they have done is they use DITA and publish to HTML as well. But they use DITA, the Data Information Typing Architecture, structured content, where they use step lists, and each step is a separate element. And then they push that into an augmented reality Microsoft HoloLens glasses. So the engineer sees in the real environment in front of them, and in the glass they see the step-in-step instruction. Pull that hatch, pull that lever, now screw this, screw, and so on. And they were first thinking, I don't think our engineers will really like that because it's somehow weird, because some elevators are very exposed with glass ceilings and whatever, and they might feel weird to work there with such glasses, but they loved it. They were excited about it and said, it makes our life much more easy. It's fun. People are looking at us. We are now a cool guy standing in the elevator, repairing the elevator. So sometimes it's surprising how people react to that, but that's this information, step-by-step instruction, is pulled from the technical documentation, from structured content, and that is a new application of content there. And I think it's a very exciting one.
It is very cool.
Brilliant. That's a great way to wrap up. I could talk about this all day, but this is the end of our time. Huge thank you to Chris Shukra and Stefan for your insights. And thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us today. If you're in manufacturing, your documentation isn't just content. It's a strategic asset, whether it's enhancing safety, enabling support, or keeping your global teams aligned. A strong content strategy pays off. Thanks again to our panelists and to our audience. We hope to see you at the next session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.